You know, when you look in the mirror or like when you feel the warmth of a coffee cup in your hands,
Yeah.
there's this underlying assumption we all make.
Right, a massive assumption.
Yeah. We assume that to have a mind or to, experience the universe, you absolutely must have a biological brain.
A squishy, carbon-based, oxygen-hungry neural network.
Exactly. Just sitting there
Yeah.
inside a skull. But what if that is just a local bias? Like,
Mhm.
what if the ability to think and to feel and to be conscious doesn't actually require biology at all?
This is a huge question.
It really is. So today we're taking you on a deep dive to answer this reality-altering question based on a really mind-bending paper by Tennyson Samraj. Does consciousness require a biological brain? Or could a mind exist in completely different forms?
Right, like an alien life or artificial intelligence.
Yeah, or even as a completely non-physical entity, like a divine mind.
It's a profound concept to wrestle with.
Mhm.
And to really navigate it, the text gives us two specific philosophical lenses. The first one is emergence. This is, well, it's the idea that when certain base components interact in a highly complex way, something entirely new comes to be.
Something that wasn't there before.
Exactly. It exhibits properties that its individual parts simply do not possess. And then the second lens is the multiple realization principle.
Right, which Hillary Putnam proposed back in, what, 1967?
Yes, 1967. And essentially, it suggests that a single phenomenon can be actualized or realized in wildly different physical forms.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because multiple realization can sound, well, a bit dense and abstract at first.
It definitely can.
But we actually see it constantly on Earth. We
Right.
don't even need to look to outer space yet to see how different physical forms experience the very same world.
Right.
Think about Putnam's classic example from the source material, the pain states.
Oh, yeah, the octopus example.
Yeah. You look at an octopus, a reptile, and a mammal. If you subject all three of them to a harmful stimulus, they all experience the sensation of pain.
They react, they try to escape, but the biological hardware running that, pain program is radically different. I mean, the neurological wiring of an octopus is almost alien compared to ours.
Right. Don't they have brains in their tentacles or something?
Basically, yeah. 2/3 of an octopus's neurons are distributed throughout its arms. It's not centralized in a single brain like ours at all.
Wow.
Yet the mental state of pain is realized across all these vastly different biological architectures.
But hold on, is it really the exact same mental state? I mean, pain in an octopus is functioning through a completely different chemical and structural pathway than pain in a human, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are we sure we aren't just, slapping the word pain onto two entirely different biological processes?
Well, that is a really fair pushback, and it gets to the heart of the mechanics here. Philosophy defines pain in this context functionally.
Functionally.
Yeah. The biological pathways are indeed different, but the functional state, that internal alarm system that recognizes bodily damage and alters behavior to avoid it, that is identical.
I see. So nature just found multiple engineering solutions to solve the exact same problem.
Precisely. And this brings up a crucial distinction in the text between what is sufficient and what is necessary.
Right.
Having a carbon-based, highly centralized neural brain like ours is clearly a sufficient condition for consciousness. We know it works. I mean, you and I are using them right now.
Speak for yourself.
Fair enough. But it might not be a necessary condition. The physical brain affords the emergence of consciousness, but it doesn't have a monopoly on it.
I want to make sure the emergence part of this is totally clear for everyone listening. Because we aren't just saying a brain creates a mind like a factory creates a car.
Right. It's not a mechanical output.
Yeah. If I understand the mechanics of emergence right, it's more like liquidity, like water turning to ice or just being wet.
That's a great analogy.
A single atom of oxygen isn't wet, and a single atom of hydrogen isn't wet. But when they interact in a massive group, the physical property of liquidity emerges. Liquidity isn't hiding inside the individual atoms. It's a totally novel property of their interaction.
Mm-hmm.
So are we saying consciousness is essentially just the liquidity of the brain?
It operates on the exact same logic, yes. The author argues that intentionality, which is the ability of a mind to think, to believe, and to direct its focus towards something, emerged from biological matter.
Okay.
Just as matter emerged from energy, intentionality emerged from matter. The physical brain provides the substrate, but the conscious mind that emerges is a completely novel, irreducible property.
So you can't just isolate one bit of the brain and say, aha, here is the mind.
Right. You can't find a single neuron that holds your consciousness,
Right?
just like you can't find a single water molecule that is wet.
Man, that's wild. So if the liquidity of a mind doesn't strictly need the specific hydrogen and oxygen of carbon-based neurons to emerge, our next logical step is to look at what other building blocks the universe might use.
Exactly. If not carbon, then what?
Right. And you look at the periodic table, and right below carbon sits silicon. They share an enormous amount of chemical properties.
They really do.
They both have 4 electrons in their outer valence shell, making them uniquely suited to form complex, long-chain molecules.
Right.
The text even mentions how scientists recently coaxed nature to build silicon-carbon bonds in a lab.
Which is incredible.
Yeah. It makes me think of that classic Star Trek episode with the Horta, the rock-eating, silicon-based alien.
Oh, absolutely. And what's fascinating here is astrobiologists and philosophers have spent decades theorizing about this exact silicon shift, but we don't even have to look for rock-eating aliens to see the beginnings of it.
We don't.
No, this actually goes all the way back to Alan Turing in 1951.
Wow, 1951.
Yeah. Turing recognized very early on that the functions of the mind could potentially be actualized in non-neural systems. Just look at the artificial intelligence we are building today on silicon microchips.
Right.
We have algorithms performing functions like complex problem solving, real-time language translation, and memory retrieval. Things that historically only biological brains could do.
Wait, but just because my self-driving car can recognize the stop sign and hit the brakes doesn't mean it's actually experiencing anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that a massive leap? To equate a purely algorithmic calculation in a silicon chip with an octopus actually feeling physical pain.
I mean, Siri isn't conscious. It's just code executing commands.
You are absolutely right to be skeptical, and Turing actually anticipated this.
Mm-hmm.
The point isn't that current AI is conscious.
Okay.
The point is that the processes of a mind are demonstrably substrate independent. We are proving that you do not need wet biological tissue to process information or adapt to environments or make decisions.
Gotcha.
So if the universe is materially similar everywhere, governed by the exact same physical laws, and if we are already building complex information processing systems out of silicon,
it implies that conscious life could be realized out there in incredibly diverse non-neural ways. Exactly. Completely oxygen-free, non-neural ways.
I see. So it forces us to kind of reevaluate what an encounter with alien intelligence might even look like. But this brings us right to a wall, doesn't it?
How so?
Because if we encounter a highly advanced sentient silicon machine, we can observe it. We can see it calculating or, seeking out energy sources, avoiding hazards.
Sure.
But the massive question remains, is there a light on inside the house? Like, does it actually experience life?
Yes. And that tension is exactly why we have to separate two massive philosophical concepts from the paper, intentionality and subjectivity.
Okay, lay those out for us.
So they're often grouped together as just consciousness, but they are fundamentally different mechanisms. Intentionality is the functional part of the mind.
Like thinking and choosing.
Right. It is the ability to have beliefs, to enact a plan. It is the mind directed outward at the world. And the fascinating thing about intentionality is that it is structurally observable.
Oh, right. Because if you put a human in an fMRI machine, you can physically map the blood flow in the brain when they're making a choice or recognizing an object.
Exactly.
You can detect intentionality mechanically.
Yes. But subjectivity, which philosophers often call qualia, is the direct opposite.
Qualia.
Yeah. Subjectivity is what it is like to be you. It is the distinct, private, inner experience of seeing the color red or feeling the sting of a paper cut or, the emotional weight of a nostalgic memory.
Okay, so intentionality is what the mind does, and subjectivity is what the mind feels like from the inside.
You nailed it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because when you dig into the mechanics of how we experience the world, subjectivity becomes incredibly strange.
Oh, absolutely.
The text brings up this concept of transduction. Like, out of the vacuum of space, the physical universe is entirely silent and completely colorless.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
It really is. Inherently, out there in the void, there is no sound and there is no color. There are simply electromagnetic waves and atmospheric pressure changes.
Just raw physical data.
Right. Color and sound are entirely secondary qualities. They do not exist outside of a mind.
Yeah.
They're just invented by our subjective interpretation of those raw physical inputs.
And this is a vital point about emergence. The biological eye and the ear act purely as mechanical transducers. They are just organic antennas.
Antennas, right.
So the retina receives a photon vibrating at a specific electromagnetic frequency, say 450 nanometers. It transduces that physical energy into an electrical signal, which travels down the optic nerve to the brain.
Okay.
But, and this is the incredible part, what the brain receives physically is utterly different from what the emergent self perceives subjectively.
Yeah.
The brain receives a tiny voltage spike, but your subjective self perceives a brilliant, vibrant blue sky.
But how does that electrical spike become the feeling of blue? That's the core of it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Because I can understand the engineering of an eye. I can trace the electricity. But the jump from electricity to the vivid inner theater of my mind, I mean, that makes no physical sense.
That is precisely what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. We can map the functional machinery of intentionality all day long, but we have absolutely no idea what the mechanical bridge is between physical matter and subjective qualia.
Wow.
And if we connect this back to our hypothetical silicon alien or advanced AI, multiple realizations strongly suggest that an alien could absolutely possess intentionality.
Right. It could process external data and make rational choices.
But because subjectivity is this irreducible, invisible, emergent property, we have no scientific way to measure if that alien actually has an inner life.
So even if we learn to speak its language perfectly.
Exactly. Knowing what it is like to be that alien remains totally inaccessible.
Man. If we can't even prove that a physical silicon AI has an inner subjective life, it makes conceptualizing a completely non-physical mind almost impossible.
So it's a huge leap.
But we have to ask the ultimate question here. If subjectivity is this invisible, irreducible property that doesn't strictly depend on a specific physical form, like if we don't need carbon and we might not even need silicon, what are the absolute limits of multiple realization?
How far can it go?
Yeah. Can a mind exist without a physical body at all?
Well, when you take the logic of multiple realization to its absolute extreme, you inevitably hit the concept of a divine mind.
Okay, let's pause here for a second now. To be clear for everyone listening, we are approaching this strictly as a philosophical mechanism.
Right. We're analyzing how these concepts apply to theology without endorsing a specific religious doctrine. We're just exploring the author's arguments impartially.
Exactly, just looking at the logic. So, philosophically speaking, if consciousness is fundamentally substrate independent,
then a mind doesn't require any physical matter to exist. The concept of God is essentially the concept of an infinite, non-neural mind.
okay, but if a divine mind has no biological hardware, no sensory organs, no physical location in space, how can it possibly relate to a finite biological mind like ours?
It seems like a paradox.
Right. What could a squishy human brain possibly have in common with an infinite non-physical entity?
Under this framework, what finite minds and an infinite mind share isn't biology or chemistry or physics.
Okay.
What they share is intentionality, that baseline capacity for thought, for awareness, and for directed action. And because this baseline is shared across vastly different realizations, it allows for a crucial philosophical condition called alterity.
Alterity, that's the condition of otherness, right? The ability to recognize another being as distinct from yourself.
Exactly. Alterity is the mechanics of encounter. How do you recognize a mind that is fundamentally different from yours, whether it's a silicon alien from another galaxy or a non-physical divine entity?
You can't rely on recognizing their physical shape or their biology.
Right. You can only recognize their intentionality. You recognize that they have a perspective, that they make choices, and that they possess an inner life distinct from your own.
So shared intentionality is the only bridge that allows two completely different realizations of consciousness to communicate.
That's the idea.
But this brings up the elephant in the room.
Huh.
Because if we are talking about non-physical states of consciousness, we are directly confronting the concept of an afterlife.
We are.
Let's look at the mechanics of this.
Yeah.
If your intentionality and your unique subjectivity, like the specific flavor of you, are emergent properties of your physical biological brain, how does you survive when that physical brain inevitably dies?
It's the ultimate question.
How do you transfer a subjective state from a carbon substrate to a non-physical state?
That is the philosophical roadblock.
Yeah.
And it is really fascinating to see how the text compares different theological frameworks to see how they engineer a solution to this exact problem.
Okay, like what?
Take certain traditions in Hinduism, where the belief is that the individual, localized soul, the Atman, eventually merges back into the infinite universal reality, the Brahman.
Right.
From a functional perspective, this implies that subjectivity is basically a temporary, localized realization that eventually dissolves back into a universal substrate.
But if the Atman completely merges into the Brahman, the fundamental question is about individuality.
Exactly.
Like if you dissolve into an infinite whole, doesn't your distinct subjectivity cease to exist? You essentially become a single drop of water falling back into the ocean.
Right. The ocean is there, the water is there.
But the drop, as an individual structured entity, is gone forever.
That is the philosophical trade-off in that model. Now, contrast that with the traditional Christian framework, which argues for eternal life, but typically includes the promise of a resurrection of the dead into a new body.
Okay, that's a very different mechanical solution.
It is. It's an attempt to preserve distinct individual identity by essentially claiming your subjectivity will be realized into a new, incorruptible physical or spiritual form.
Right. It's essentially saying the carbon brain failed, but God will upload your specific subjectivity into a new permanent hardware.
Basically, yes.
But wait. Even if an omnipotent force perfectly recreates my exact subjective state, is it actually me? I mean, this goes right back to the core of identity. Philosophy has a massive problem with this, right?
It absolutely does, and it hinges on a principle formulated by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, known as the identity of indiscernibles.
The identity of indiscernibles. Okay.
Leibniz proposed a very strict rule for identity. He said if two things are truly the same entity, they must share every single property in common, including their exact location in space and time.
So to use the water analogy again, if I have a water molecule right here in my left hand, and another water molecule in my right hand, and they are completely, flawlessly identical down to the quantum level. Like, they spin the exact same way, they have the exact same mass. They're still not the same molecule.
Precisely. They occupy different spatial coordinates. They are two numerically distinct entities that just happen to have identical properties.
Wow.
So apply Leibniz's rule to the concept of resurrection or an afterlife transfer. If your biological brain dies, and an exact, flawless replica of your subjectivity is generated in a new spiritual body or a non-physical realm.
Leibniz would argue that it is not structurally you.
Right. It is a perfect copy,
Yeah.
a continuation of your pattern, perhaps, but the original subjective continuity was broken.
Because the original entity and the new entity do not share the same continuous path through space and time. The first one ended, and the new one began.
Yeah.
So while the principle of multiple realization makes the concept of an afterlife logically possible, because we've already established that consciousness isn't locked into carbon biology, the actual mechanics of transferring a unique subjective identity without breaking that continuity
Remains totally unexplained.
that is wild.
It is a profound boundary. Philosophy can show us that the mind isn't strictly bound to the physical brain. It can show us that the universe might be teeming with diverse, realized forms of consciousness.
Yeah.
But it cannot give us the mechanical bridge for how a specific subjective identity crosses over the threshold of death. That transition remains entirely beyond detectable science. It demands a leap into faith that strict logic simply cannot follow.
Man. It's just wild to look back at the sheer scale of the journey we just went on.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. We started by examining the pain receptors of an octopus to prove that the biological hardware of a mind is flexible. Then we pushed that flexibility further, looking at Turing and silicon, proving that even the base chemical elements of intelligence are adaptable. We dug into the mechanics of transduction, the silent, colorless physics of reality, to isolate the hard problem of how a mechanical brain generates the vivid magic of a subjective inner world.
Right.
And finally, we follow the logic of emergence all the way out to the absolute extremes, the philosophical architecture of an infinite divine mind, and the seemingly unsolvable paradox of preserving the human soul.
What stands out to me is how this completely upends our everyday assumptions. We walk around feeling like our biological minds are the default setting of the universe.
Oh, 100%.
But when you really examine the mechanics of emergence and multiple realization, you realize human biology is just one highly specific local solution to a universal equation.
Yeah.
Consciousness might be a phenomenon threaded throughout the cosmos in ways we don't even have the vocabulary to describe yet.
Changes how you look at a lot of things.
Yeah.
And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. something that brings all this grand cosmic philosophy right back to our own immediate future. We talked about how fragile our specific realization of consciousness is. Medical science already knows how to induce unconsciousness, right? An anesthesiologist can essentially switch off your subjective sense of self.
Right, plunging you into a state with absolutely no inner experience just by altering the chemical state of your neural network.
Exactly. And then, thankfully, they reverse it to bring you back online. But if our unique, subjective inner world is just a temporary chemical emergence, what happens when human science eventually attempts to bypass biology altogether?
It's a terrifying thought.
Let's say 50 years from now, to avoid the ineffable mystery and the risk of biological death, we figure out how to multiply, realize human consciousness.
Uploading mind.
Yeah. We map every single neural connection in your brain and upload your exact subjectivity into an advanced, immortal silicon server network. Here is the question Leibniz leaves us with. When the doctors administer that final anesthetic,
Yeah.
and your biological brain goes dark,
Yeah.
and they instantly flip the switch on that server farm, will the entity waking up inside the computer actually be you experiencing a new digital dawn?
Yeah.
Or will your subjective experience simply end forever on the operating table, silently replaced by a perfectly identical digital replica that is completely, utterly convinced that it is you?